And a reminder that you're listening to Business Daily from the BBC with me, Manuela Saragossa. Well, it's not the first time the pharmaceuticals industry has been accused of shaping the market according to its commercial interests rather than according to what's beneficial to the patient. In a moment, we'll hear what the industry has to say to that. But first, a few years ago here in the UK, an official report found that a whopping half of women and 43% of men in England were regularly taking prescription drugs. Official reports show the same sort of trend in the US. It worries medics like Asim Malhotra. He's a London-based cardiologist.
Commercial corruption of medical science, sadly, has become endemic and is actually the root cause behind modern healthcare crisis. So we have essentially an epidemic of misinformed doctors, misinformed public, misled patients, based upon the fact that we have biased funding of research. That's research that's funded because it's likely to be profitable, not beneficial for patients, biased reporting in medical journals, biased reporting in the media, and commercial conflicts of interest, in particular the United States.
So when you read, as a doctor, when you read, say, a respected medical journal, do you read everything with a lot of scepticism? Do you specifically look at who funded the research that they're writing up?
I do both. It's very difficult for most doctors because you just don't simply have time to read through lots of papers. But certainly with new drugs that are coming on the market that are going to affect my patients, then I will scrutinise that data in a much more rigorous fashion than I used to. But absolutely, I'll also look at where the funding of that particular research has come from. But what I then do also is use that information, even at face value, and translate it in a transparent way when I have conversations with patients. People still have this false perception, if you like, that medicine is an exact science. Medicine is not an exact science. It's more the practice of the art of probability.
But the pharmaceutical industry would like us to think it's an exact science.
They would like us to think that. And when they market new drugs that are coming out, they use something in statistics we call relative risk. But the reality is most people taking most medications for prevention of heart disease or treatment, for example, of blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, cholesterol, most people are not going to benefit. So I'll give you an example. Based upon published industry-sponsored research, if you're a type 2 diabetic and you are given a statin, then you can say this will result in a 48% relative risk reduction in you having a stroke in the next few years. That sounds very impressive. It actually means that there's a 1 in 77 chance that you as an individual taking that drug will benefit.
Why isn't this being fed through the regulators? Why aren't the regulators on top of this?
You know, it's a very good question. There's partly a cultural problem. I think doctors themselves have been misinformed for so long. I also think a lot of the scientists who are in positions of power on these regulatory panels and guideline boards, they themselves have a vested interest. They're usually linked in some way to the industry. They are considered experts. They may be involved in the trials. The institutions that they are part of, the universities, also will take huge amounts of money. That doesn't mean that the individual scientists are kind of taking backhanders and going off on fancy holidays or whatever else.
Is it groupthink then?
It is groupthink. And a lot of this has also been swept under the carpet or ignored because the very people who should be speaking out are afraid to do so because if they do, they may lose their job, they may lose promotion.
And when you say the people who should be speaking, the regulators, I presume?
Absolutely.
What do you think needs to happen for there to be more of a separation between the industry and the regulators and the GPs who dole out the medicine?
This problem is so endemic that last year, myself and a number of prominent physicians, including the editor of JAMA Internal Medicine in America, the former president of the Royal College of Physicians, we called for a public inquiry, not to finger point, but to say, listen, this is a system failure. We need to get everyone around the table. Clinicians, scientists involved in research. We need to get the medical journal editors. We need to get industry around the table, the regulator, and say, listen, the current status quo is not acceptable. It's big reason behind why we're having an over-medicated population that actually is resulting in, around the world, hundreds of thousands of deaths every year, by the way, side effects of medications. What can we do to improve it, and also to improve the integrity of science? Medical journal editors are also at risk of being sacked if they question industry influence over what's being published. This actually happened in Australia. In 2015, a very respected public health professor, Stephen Leader, he was sacked for questioning more commercial influence over the Medical Journal of Australia. And in protest, 17 out of 20 of his editorial team resigned in protest.
I suppose the industry, the pharmaceutical industry will say, okay, there may be people who die of side effects from over-medication, but there are also lots of lives that do get saved. Hundreds of thousands more lives that get saved.
Yeah, I've no doubt about that, Manuela. The question is, we need to actually find out exactly how many lives are being saved. The problem is we don't know. There is so much research that's published that later on we find out actually had no benefit to patients. Effectively, our patients are guinea pigs and they don't even know it.
That was London-based cardiologist Asim Malhotra. So what does the pharmaceuticals industry have to say in response? Well, Dr. Virginia Atta is Executive Director of Research at the Association of the British Pharmaceuticals Industry.
We have both code and law that are helping us to keep on the straight and narrow on that transparency. Is there more that we can do? Absolutely.
What then, for example?
I would bring to bear some really interesting research by the Academy of Medical Sciences, a report that just published, which looked precisely at these issues of how do we build trust and understanding around the evidence of a medicine. And in their arguments, they've got proposals around some approaches to how we might do better transparency and disclosure arrangements. They were very clear in the report that it's still important to have these partnerships between academia and industry, and that industry sponsorship or commercial sponsorship per se isn't the issue. It's how we're managing and monitoring the process. It's a matter of trust and verify.
Would you acknowledge that having things happen like the Australian editor of this particular medical journal there, having him sacked because a private company takes over the publication of that journal,
I think
it just does not send out the right kind of message?
I don't think that's a question for the pharmaceutical industry to be answering. I think the question really is perception. So I do think you're right about that. So again, the Academy of Medical Sciences picked up on a fact that people are genuinely unsure about how to take the evidence as provided around a medicine. One thing I think they do ignore, and it's something that's concerned me deeply, is the role of the regulator. The idea that the regulator may be somehow bought by the industry is just I came from a regulatory background, so for me that's just absolutely impossible. We do not have industry people sat on committees within the regulator.
Are they people who have been in industry?
No, they're usually people who have either been, where they usually get challenges, they're experts in their field. So they're people that are academics who are expert in their field or worked in health care or worked in other regulators within, taking the case of the European agencies, it would be one of the European competent authorities. It's experts who are expert in their field. So the point about regulation is, again, it's a scientific judgment. They are bringing in the experts who are able to guide them on a judgment. Those individuals are held to very high standards of disclosure.
What about the point that Dr. Malhotra makes, that medicine is not an exact science?
Well, I would totally agree.
And often it is presented as an exact science.
I would
Isn't that
not,
also
no, and I
the
think
perception
that's
problem?
the perception problem, absolutely. So because of the code arrangements, and again, it's perception entirely. So companies are required to follow codes around their marketing, around their transmission of any materials around the medicines, and if you see them, they will have a lot of disclaimers in them. If you watch the television there and they put on a commercial and you hear that long stream of banter at the end, well, that's a disclaimer. Do people listen to it? Well, there's a challenge. And again, what I really liked about the Academy's report is that they pulled out the issues around the patient information leaflet. How many people actually read the leaflet?
Other people might say, well, it's not down to the patient to read the leaflet, it's down to the GP or whoever's
true.
Prescribing it to spell out the risks.
Absolutely. And I think that's where more work can be done. What I see now is a challenge that I think Dr. Malhotra is absolutely right. We need to address together, because I can't control what goes into a patient information leaflet. That's a regulatory decision, what goes into a patient information leaflet. But if we can all sit around the table, perhaps we can write a better one.
And in the meantime, would you accept that there are a lot of patients out there who are being over-prescribed medication?
I couldn't speak to that, because the question is really to the doctors who are taking care of them. And it's probably not a pharmaceutical company's place to tell them what they should or should not prescribe.
But it is remarkable, isn't it, that studies have shown here in the UK and in the US that the number of medications an individual is taking on average has shot up in the last couple of decades.
And it partly reflects the fact that we're also living longer, which is a good thing. But as we get older, we do have a number of challenges that come along. It's reflecting, an aging process that we try and control through medication. The question I would like to see us take is, what role does the patient have in the choice of what medicines they take, what treatments they undertake, and how they
are informed?
Absolutely. It's in no benefit for a patient to be taking medicines that are doing them ill.
But you're saying it's not an issue really for the pharmaceutical, it's an issue for medical profession.
It's not a responsibility that we can take, at least not on our own.
Well, there will be people who say it is partly a responsibility.
Only if I could take, but it's not something I could do whereby a patient, I could say, oh, you're on too many meds. I don't think that would be appropriate. I think that's a conversation that a doctor has with their patient.
That was Dr. Virginia Acha, Executive Director of Research at the Association of the British Pharmaceuticals Industry. And she brings us to the end of this edition of Business Daily. We're back again at the same time on Monday.